All right, next team added to the list here, Minnesota Vikings. Completely overhauled that offensive line. I mean, they're another team now. They had a decision on Sam Darnold. So they had a legitimate decision that was, I don't know if it was made easier by the collapse over the last couple
I
weeks,
think it was
but
made harder.
it was probably made even more difficult.
In fact, I think it changed the decision, but I think it made the decision harder.
I mean, not if we went back in time, if Sam Darnold was average in those last two games, they lost, a hard fought game against the Lions and against the Rams in the playoffs. If that was the case, I think the Vikings bring Sam Darnold back,
Yeah.
but to the detriment of the moves that they did make, which was the offensive line. So here's what Minnesota did actually do. They didn't pay Sam Darnold. So now they play in this first contract quarterback world, which frees up the money to go get Will Fries at right guard, who's got 5 or 6 good game stretches in his career. Like, he hasn't been a great guard, but he's making over $17 million a year. Ryan Kelly at center, first round pick Donovan Jackson. So that's like the balance. I always talk about the balance sheet. Coming into the offseason, I don't know if Minnesota lays this out perfectly, but you could have had one Sam Darnold and maybe a Ryan Kelly on the offensive line. You get one offensive line upgrade, or you could have JJ McCarthy and 3 potential offensive line upgrades with Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, and Donovan Jackson. So that was what they went in with. And look, JJ McCarthy plus an overhauled interior offensive line. That was the big offseason here for the Vikings. Plus the defensive moves, bringing in Javon Hargrave, bringing in Jonathan Allen. They have been incredibly aggressive bringing in veteran talent the last few seasons.
Yeah, and there's also so first and foremost, it's like the Darnold question heading into the offseason. I think those final 2 games made that a very difficult question for Minnesota. I agree. I think if he had played average or well in those final 2 games, I think they'd have re-signed him and brought him back, and they would have gone a completely different direction, and that would have changed everything. It would have reduced the spending money they have, all these kinds of things. And I think given how dramatic the collapse was and given the money that the Seattle Seahawks ended up paying him, I think the Vikings were correct to stick with the original game plan, which is JJ McCarthy is the starter for this team. Darnold was only ever there as a placeholder. And though he may have changed our minds through 15 games last season, what we saw at the end was so concerning. We're better off just sticking with the original plan and moving on. So I think the first thing first, I think they made the correct decision to move on from Sam Darnold and go in a different direction. Now it's not to say there's no risk attached to that, right? We don't know what JJ McCarthy's going to be yet. And maybe it's like, the way if you flip a coin 10 times and they come up heads 10 times, it doesn't change the odds that the 11th will be heads or tails, right? It does, however, feel a lot less likely that the next one will also be heads. I kind of feel that way with the quarterbacks from last year, even though all of the other ones look good. That doesn't change the odds that JJ McCarthy will be good from that class, but it sort of feels like it does, right?
Yep.
Like the chances of it almost feels like because all of the other ones are good, the next one has to not be good.
Or it's like, oh, he was just part of this great class. He's just
maybe
he's there with those guys. The other part of the equation here is they're probably going to get a 3rd round compensatory pick next year for Sam Darnold. So that's all a part of the equation. And I'm a big, I don't know how much teams actually look at this, but I love the thought exercise of the holistic. Here's what we got from this guy. Here's what we paid for this guy. Here's what we got out of him. And what an investment in Sam Darnold. 1 year, $10 million got you a 14-win season and then a 3rd round pick back in, compensatory the following year. That if you make, so my theory on that is if you continue to make moves like that over time, like you're winning, right? You're building a better roster. The tricky part is in the middle where you say, well, actually, did we stumble into our next franchise quarterback at Sam Darnold? And that's what complicated things for at least a little bit.
I mean, if you took the play out of it, if you just sort of, I mean, an NFL team would pay $10 million for a 3rd round pick in a heartbeat, right? So if you just look at it that way, they effectively paid $10 million of cap space last season for a 3rd round draft pick next season. Every NFL team would do that instantly. Like if you gave them the option to buy draft picks like that for $10 million, they would make that move in a heartbeat. Added to the fact that they then had this incredibly successful season and, looked like they were going to be a Super Bowl contender until the collapse at the end. It was an incredible move for them. But I also think that's why they deserve credit for saying, good as that was, the correct thing to do is to move on and take the 3rd round pick and not spend the money and give the keys to the quarterback we thought was going to be in charge last season anyway, instead of, being distracted by the success of last season and sort of almost, not being fooled because maybe Darnold could repeat that, but potentially changing everything based off those games.
Hey guys, just taking a quick break to tell you, hey, just over 50% of you are still unsubscribed to Check the Mic. It helps the channel. It helps to make sure that you don't miss any of our shows. So if you have a chance, hit the subscribe button right now. Well, the other data point that you got there that I mentioned throughout the season a lot is a Kevin O'Connell data point. Now we have career 500 quarterback Kirk Cousins becomes like a 650 quarterback with the Vikings. We have career underachieving former first rounder Sam Darnold all of a sudden becomes a 14-win quarterback under Kevin O'Connell. He's stacking W's over there, Sam, as far as QB development goes. Now, look, that's a sample size of 2. We don't live in that world of he's going to do it again. But if he does it with J.J. McCarthy, the only other coaches who have that kind of track record and history in the NFL, I would say, are Kyle Shanahan and Andy Reid, who, as offensive-minded coaches, have gotten really good play out of either different style quarterbacks or quarterbacks who didn't do things elsewhere, right? That's the way I would put it. Shanahan has a history there. Andy Reid has a history there. We're one quarterback away now from putting Kevin O'Connell there, and I think that's really valuable. It becomes a valuable lesson here for the Vikings, and maybe part of the decision as well. Hey, he might be our big advantage. O'Connell, the system, also the pass catchers were fantastic. But yeah, look, Minnesota went into the offseason saying we've got, I think there's 2 things here. Issues on the interior of the offensive line. They brought in the 2 Colts, Ryan Kelly and Will Fries. They drafted Donovan Jackson, completely overhauled from left guard to right guard. That feels like a move in the right direction. The other piece was now for the second straight offseason, they brought in pass rushers. Last year, they went hard on the edge, Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, and they drafted Dallas Turner. This year, it's Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen on the interior. So now you've talked a lot about Brian Flores' defense. There's a point in the season where maybe teams catch on and it's not great. They finally, I think, have the flexibility to just rush 4. You don't have to be crazy aggressive and wild from a defensive scheme standpoint. You can just rush 4 and change things up on third down. And it does feel like that's been a move the Vikings have been at least itching toward these last couple off seasons.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how those defensive tackles pan out, because at their best, those guys have each had a season that ranks amongst the best pass rushers from the inside in the NFL, right? They've each been, I think, a top 3 graded interior pass rusher at PFF at some point in their NFL career. Now, neither guy is coming off that season, and Jonathan Allen in particular, it's been a little while since he's been at that level. Javon Hargrave, is coming off injury, and he may be declining at this point. So there's a sort of sizable amount of risk attached to both those guys, but the payoff could be huge. If each one of those guys is able to recapture something like their best play within this creative, attacking Brian Flores defense, that could be a monster upgrade for what has been a pretty weak part of this team for a few years now.
Yeah, and look, when you have, keep repeating this, but when you have first contract QB, when you have financial flexibility, I think you can make signings like that feel a little riskier. Oh, Jonathan Allen with his injuries and Hargrave hasn't played his best football in a year or 2. I think you can make those moves because, again, where else are you going to spend the money? You're trying to hit home runs, I think, with the financial flexibility, and that's where Minnesota is. I thought they tried to hit home runs in some good places. They wanted to be better on the spine of both lines of scrimmage, and I think they upgraded in both areas.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.